I'm going to do is to start off with a little backstory from each of you. So, Jim, I'm actually going to pick on you first. Yes, and I want you to share a little bit about what are some key moments in your life that really helped shape you as be the person you are today.
Great. Thank you, Bobby. Oops. Is this on?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Bobby. First, let me thank all of you for your interest in coming together and having this conversation. It's a real privilege to be able to be here with you, to share a stage with these two extraordinary leaders, and I'm grateful for that invitation, so thank you very much, and thanks for letting us into your home, if you will. In terms of what shaped me, I think I'd probably just tell one anecdote, and then I think there are a number of issues that will flow from that anecdote. My mother was 16 years old when I was born, and so as a result, it fell upon my great-grandmother, who was an immigrant from Nicaragua, to raise me. And she was 66 years old when she took me into her home, and I lived with her up until she was about 89 years old. So for that span of time, and she basically was my mother, my father. She was everything in my life. Fortunately, my parents, as they grew older, got more integrated in my life, so it's not as though I didn't have parents, but I didn't have a traditional upbringing in the sense that I was raised by this woman who was 70 to 80 years older than I was as time went on. And I would say that shaped my life in a number of ways. I think it shaped my ambition in the sense that I was raised here in San Francisco. I was born in San Francisco. I was raised in Bernal Heights. Very different back in the 1970s and 80s than it is today. Not quite as hip as it may be today. And very kind of different sort of structure there, I would say, in terms of the class structure of Bernal Heights. But I think my ambition was shaped in the sense that I was raised in a very lower middle income household, and I saw what it was like. I fortunately had enough to sort of get by in my life, but I saw a lot of people around me who were very poor and struggling. And I think that does shape your ambition in terms of wanting to sort of do something that extends beyond that kind of situation in your own life and ultimately help others who come behind you in your family to have the kinds of opportunities that I was afforded to have. I think it also shaped my sense of humility. I've tried to have sort of being humble be a real core part of who I am in my career. I've been able to do a lot. A lot of it has been good luck. A lot of it has been right place, right time. I'm sure some of it has been because of skill. But I would say that I was raised in a household where I knew what it was like, again, to not have very much. And I think when you're raised from that kind of upbringing, humility becomes a big part of your life. And I think the third way in which it shaped me was really a commitment to service. My great-grandmother is someone who really didn't have very much and was an immigrant, was constantly helping other immigrants from Central America as they were transitioning to this country. The number of times that we were taking clothes over to people's homes or that we were helping them to acclimate to being in San Francisco and starting their life, I think it really sort of imbued in me, if you will, a sense of service and giving to others. And then, notwithstanding the challenges of Catholic education, and I was raised Catholic and went to Catholic school through 12th grade, there were also some wonderful elements around it with regard to service, and I think those have very much shaped who I am. So ambition, humility, service, not necessarily three words you would think together, but I think they all emanate from this wonderful upbringing that I was privileged to have.
Thank you so much. I learned so much about Jim. This is wonderful. I also want to thank you all for inviting us in this opportunity to share and break bread and break thoughts. So, and Bobby, thank you very much. You know, I in many ways we share some similarities in our stories. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. My parents are Puerto Rican. So you don't get a lot of Puerto Ricans out here, but we're everywhere. We are everywhere. We are. It's like, somos como el arroz blanco. Right, exactly. You know, it was, you know, very much my parents immigrated to this country in the 1950s. My mother and my father immigrated. And I think my mother, my father, and my culture really shape who I am today in so many ways. My mother was orphaned at age 5, and was dirt poor in Puerto Rico. And if you are orphaned at age 5 in Puerto Rico and you have no parents, there's no such thing as foster care or anything like that back then, okay? You hope that someone would take you in. So she was taken in, not by family, but by sort of who was available. And it means that by 10, my mother was working a full-time job. because if she did not make money to feed herself and then provide money for the people that were taking care of her, she would go hungry. So by 10, so my mother was very industrious, and my mother became an entrepreneur. You know, my mother, with speaking almost no English, she moved. My mother married at 14, had her first child at 16, and by 17 immigrated to New York City with my father. Okay, so no high school diploma, no nothing, right? And by the time my mother was in her 20s, she was running a restaurant, and then she was owning 2 restaurants. Okay. And raising a whole gaggle of children, a lot of them. My father, on the other hand, was this amazing artist. So I am very touched to be surrounded by art, because I was blessed by having, my father was a painter and an artist, and a romantic and an intellectual, who would write songs and do art and poetry and play the harmonica and accordion and stuff. For every part of the practical side of my mother, my father was the dreamer. He was the dreamer. So I always say that. So from my father, I learned how to really, my father taught me how to think outside the box. My father taught me how to dream around possibility. My father taught me that the starkness of what I was experiencing as a child, we grew up very poor in Bushwick and New York, and for those who you don't know, it's like a cross between Bayview and the Mission before it got gentrified. Okay, that's how. Okay, very, very poor. But my father taught me to see everything around me as being an absolute gem, right? It was a treasure, right? There was nothing more exciting than taking a walk in the little park and seeing a tree. And so I got that ability to think outside the box and always see possibility wherever I went. Always see that, okay? From my mother, I got the side of me that's about enterprise, about building businesses and building communities and building opportunities and learning. And both of them were really fanatical about education, because they believed that education was the ticket out. Education was the ticket out. And so my mother, the entrepreneur in me comes from my mother. From my culture, from being Latina, not just Latino, but Latina, right? Being a Latin woman and being a Caribbean Latin woman, because we often think we're all the same. But there is a difference, and I'm from a Caribbean Latin woman. The notion of community and passion and taking life in its absolute fullest at every single, not wasting a moment. The anchors of family and community, those are the things that shape me today. So when I look at myself today, people often say, what are you? How would you categorize yourself? I said, well, I can tell you all the identities I carry. But that would just go on. We wouldn't have time, okay, if I went through all the identities I carry. All I can say is I am multilingual. I speak English, Spanish, corporate, community, philanthropy, all of that stuff, okay? That's number one. But I call myself a social justice capitalist, a social justice. Now, often we hear in the literature out there, what does it mean to be a social capitalist? It's a person that fundamentally believes that the marketplace is a vehicle by which you can do great social justice, right? You can do it, right? So I bring this notion of business and community and nonprofit together. But I've inserted justice in the middle of that, because that's often missing from the social capitalist paradigm. And that is that the service is not just around helping people reach their maximum potential and seeing the value in everyone, right? That's one. But it's around an absolute obligation to service, an obligation to doing. I think you said something to me, Bobby, when we were talking, which was you grew up with the notion of doing the right thing, right? What does it really mean to do the right thing? And that, to me, is what justice is about. So I call myself a social capitalist, a social justice capitalist.